Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee of Budget and Tax. Senator Salling is unfortunately under the weather, so we're going to be 3 for 4 today. We are hearing 3 budgets: Office of the State Prosecutor, MDOT, the Secretary's Office, and Department of Agriculture, and we will go in that order. And with us, we have Jacob, our analyst for Office of State Prosecutor. Jacob, take it away.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The Office of the State Prosecutor is an independent agency within the executive branch that investigates and, where warranted, prosecutes criminal offenses affecting the honesty and integrity of governmental officials, institutions, and the electoral process. Excuse me. In fiscal 2024, the Office of the State Prosecutor's budget increases by $128,842, or about 5.7%. to $2.4 million. And we can see that on page 1. Going to page 2, we find information on a couple of proposed deficiency appropriations to supplement the fiscal 2023 budget by $263,000 and change in general funds. Deficiencies are provided for 2 things. The first, to supplement the appropriation for 3 contractual positions for an assistant state prosecutor, a paralegal, and 2 part-time investigators. And then the second, to supplement operational shortfalls in a couple of different areas, including regular salaries and motor vehicle expenses, among others. At the bottom half of page 2, we see an overview of the agency's spending. In Exhibit 1, approximately 85% of the budget is dedicated to personnel spending. Other large parts of the budget include contractual spending, which is mostly used for transcription services for depositions, interviews, and other legal proceedings. So with personnel at 85%, and then those contractual charges at 10%, that leaves 5% of the budget for other purposes. Going to page 3, we see again the growth of about $129,000, or about 5.7%. The biggest changes on the personnel side are incremental salary increases, an increase in employee and retiree health insurance, and the annualization of November 2022's 4.5% cost of living adjustment. Other significant changes outside of regular personnel include the purchase of 5 motor vehicles for investigation and prosecution related travel, and lower budgeted turnover for contractual personnel. The motor vehicles, as previously mentioned, there are 5 of them funded in this budget. OSP has determined that their various needs would be best served by 1 sedan and 4 SUVs. The vehicles are intended to be used for travel throughout the state for investigations, prosecutions, and surveillance. The different vehicle types are useful for different purposes, and the vehicles also help to protect employee safety. In terms of personnel data, OSP had 1 vacant position as of the end of December 2022. The 1 regular position currently vacant is expected to be filled by a contractual attorney who has agreed to join OSP on a permanent basis. The 3 new contractual full-time equivalent positions in the fiscal 24 allowance represent 4 contractual employee positions, with one of the full-time equivalents being split in half, with the first half being a criminal investigator and the second being a forensic auditor. The second is for a contractual attorney to assist in handling OSP's increased caseload, and the third is for a paralegal to assist with investigations and litigation. On page 5, we find information on corruption complaints increasing after the implementation of a new reporting system. Corruption complaints submitted to OSP increased more than tenfold between fiscal 2019 and 2022, growing from 36 complaints to 439 complaints over that 4-year period. OSP has attributed this spike in corruption complaints to its rollout of a new online system for submitting complaints, as well as an increased presence on social media. The increase in complaints has accordingly resulted in an increase in the number of investigations opened, with 63 investigations opened in fiscal 2022 as opposed to 35 in fiscal 2019. Exhibit 3 in the middle of page 5 shows corruption complaints and investigations opened between fiscal 2019 to fiscal 2023. While OSP is receiving more complaints, the number of investigations opened has not risen proportionally. Following the increase in complaints received, OSP has implemented new processes for triaging and adequately assessing every complaint received with help from a new case management system. On page 6, we find that election law referrals have decreased while enforcement actions have increased. The number of referrals generally fluctuates in concert with the federal election cycle. As such, the years with the highest referrals recently have been fiscal 2021 with 506 referrals and fiscal 2019 with 463 referrals. The number of referrals tends to be lower in years without a federal election, as seen in fiscal 2018, when only 218 election law referrals were made to OSP. Exhibit 4 in the middle of page 6 shows a breakdown of election law referrals and enforcement actions over that time period between 2018 to 2023. It's worth noting in that exhibit that enforcement actions taken is a measure that was not reported prior to fiscal 2020. And with that, we just have our operating budget recommended actions, and we recommend concurring with the governor's allowance.
Thank you, Jacob. Questions for our analyst? Okay, seeing none, we have the state prosecutor with us.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee. My name is Charlton Howard. I'm the state prosecutor for the state of Maryland. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about the important work of our office. I'm joined here today by our Deputy State Prosecutor, Sarah David, and our Director of Administration, Ruth Sweeney. The Office of State Prosecutor has jurisdiction over specific crimes related to political corruption, official misconduct, and election law. This year, our office received a record number of complaints, as the analyst has ably described, and has charged corruption cases throughout the state of Maryland. In addition, our office has worked hard to ensure that elections are fair and transparent. Cite a few examples from our caseload of the past year. We charged 2 campaign treasurers, one in Baltimore County and one in Annapolis, with the theft of campaign funds. We also charged a former delegate for abusing his position in the Maryland General Assembly for using funds allocated for a district office for rent of a personal residence. A lot of our actions, however, involve more resolutions because our goal is always compliance. It is not necessarily punishment, and to deter people from erring and to ensure that they're complying with the election laws and the provisions to guarantee the integrity of Maryland elections. We've also seen a significant increase in our police misconduct complaints and have charged police misconduct cases in Wycomico County, Dorchester County, Calvert County, and Anne Arundel County, to name a few, which explains our need for vehicles and other funding to allow us to do our work throughout the breadth of our beautiful state here. In that vein, we have structured our prosecution team to reflect the increasing complaints in specialized areas of law. I cannot, of course, discuss cases that have not been charged, but our overall case numbers show the significant increase in corruption and police misconduct allegations our office has received over the past 2 years. We've also seen a significant increase in the special victims cases within our jurisdiction. In fact, we are now creating a position of senior assistant state prosecutor specifically to address police misconduct, focused on the legal and practical complexities that come with these investigations and prosecutions. And we're also in the process of creating a position for a senior assistant state prosecutor who handles special victims cases, which have their own complexities and requirements, to address the increasing number of cases we receive in that vein. This is all in addition to our existing caseload and complex political corruption cases, which is spread across our vast number of prosecutors, which are at this time just 4, including myself, and our deputy state's attorney, who also handles our budget and legislation in addition to a full caseload. While our resources are limited, we work hard for our important mission. We appreciate the governor's allowance in our budget and concur with that allowance. Thank you so much for your attention and your support of our office. We've also provided written testimony just to expand on some of the questions that the analyst had about our office and our structure and future goals. And we certainly welcome any questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. And I have to say, well, none of us behind this section of the room ever want to have to interact with your office. I have, and I just want to commend your staff for being just the utmost professionals and incredibly thorough, and I appreciate your work.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Senator Jackson, then Senator Rosepet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome. I have interacted with your office as well. As a matter of fact, I sort of got the connotation over in the House as the the poster child for campaign finance, and we pushed a number of bills, and which makes sense for all of us going forward. I intend to contact your office offline regarding my case. Not my case. Strike that. So regarding the resolution of it. So understanding, as you mentioned in your comments, the goal is to get folks to adhere to the law and to avoid punishment as necessary. But as we know, with our system, the system that's emulated across the world, and it's about making everyone whole, particularly when you're talking campaign finance, the constituency who has invested in these matters. So we will be in contact offline, and I guess I can say I like working with your office. You do great work.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Isn't that so? Yeah.
As necessary.
Yeah, I have no recollection of working with your office. I'm just saying that for the record.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, I understand. But I want to go to the stats on the corruption complaints and investigations open.
Right.
I'm a little confused with this in the sense that looking at the chart, big increase in complaints, not big increase in investigations open, which suggests there's several theories. One is you're getting a lot of complaints that don't justify opening investigations, which could possibly be true. One could be you get lots of complaints that do require opening investigations, but you're not doing that because you don't have the resources, or some third explanation that I haven't thought of. So I'm curious as to how you look at that.
Well, that's a great question, Senator, and thank you. And I welcome the opportunity to explain it. When graphed the way it is, it certainly demonstrates that we have significantly increased on our overall number of complaints.
Yeah.
And that, as Jacob mentioned, is due to a variety of reasons. One is when I took office in 2019, and I come from both a mixed investigative background and prosecutive background. So we're uniquely qualified for this. And though I never anticipated to shape my career that way, it seems like I'm able to utilize those areas of expertise. And I recognize that in the investigative area, we were not complying with best business practices that other investigative agencies do in the assessing and triage complaints. And certainly we're doing a great job, but there was ways using technology and using protocols to assess and triage those complaints. So first to assess, because if you're not getting a significant number of complaints that are not meritorious, that you're not opening investigations, then you're not casting the net wide enough. You're going to miss some that are meritorious.
Okay.
So we employed a couple different measures. One, we adopted an electronic case management system, which most investigative agencies in this era now utilize to document our cases for a variety of reasons. One, to establish metrics that we can go in and justify what we're doing, but also to ensure appropriate and absolute accuracy in the documentation of complaints. Ensure something doesn't drop through the cracks and we can move forward. I also established a complaint portal on our website because we would get complaints referred from the legislature, from the governor, from local states attorneys, from people who knew about our office. But our office isn't the most well-known agency in the state of Maryland, and I'm not trying to make it that way. Rather have everybody compliant, and then we could take it a little bit easier. So, but that complaint portal, with the opportunity to upload documents, surfaced a number of great investigations, but it also brought a lot of people who might have complaints about anyone in the state or local government that they feel is misconduct, because unless you're a lawyer and you start parsing through what misconduct is. So I will know that at least 70-80% of the complaints we receive that we don't open investigations, we do refer that matter to another agency which seems more appropriately within their bailiwick. So we're almost acting like an intake.
Gotcha.
The complaint desk for the state of Maryland. Sometimes we feel we are that way, but I think that's important because citizens come to us in good faith to make a complaint. We ought to get it to the hands of someone who can address those issues. And sometimes that someone is a federal agency, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and or others that
Gotcha.
can address what these specific complaints are. So we work through that. The our investigations have just about doubled. And I would note that we're doing this with the same number of personnel we did back in 2019. Hence, one of our requirements to try to move to some contractual billets. Ultimately, down the road, I would love to convert those to permanent positions, but it's a tight budget. It's
I'm
always a
sorry.
tight
Can I
budget.
just quick, you say your number of investigations have doubled
Yes, if you look from about doubled. So
from when to when?
from 2019 to today.
I see. Okay. If you look over that span, I
Yes,
see now. I'm
yeah.
looking at the chart.
And so it looks, when graphed against the vast number of complaints, it looks like a very small increase, but actually it's almost 50%.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
we are taking on a large number of complaints, and then we have a formal protocol for assessing and determining complaints.
Gotcha.
I am very proud of that. I think we professionally consider things. It's very common to say, well, this person has an agenda, we will ignore what they're saying. But having worked in the law enforcement and in legal world for over 40 years, everybody has an agenda. That doesn't mean what they're saying isn't true.
Right.
You know,
No, I understand.
So we bring that in, analyze and assess those, and determine if it's within our jurisdiction. And then if there's sufficient indicia of criminal culpability or potential for criminal culpability for us to move forward.
Gotcha.
To initiate investigation.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
That's
That's
been
very
our
helpful.
approach.
I
I
appreciate
don't
it.
know if I hope that answers.
No,
your
it totally
question.
answered my question. Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you. That makes a tremendous amount of sense. And I'd like to congratulate you. You get the runner-up award for lowest vacancy rate, which is 1. I'm sorry to say that Alcohol Tobacco Commission beat you with 0, but 1's not bad at all.
I will note, Senator,
Yeah.
as of today, it is 0.
Well, you're going to tie with Director Kelly then.
Yes,
Okay.
right.
So I'd like to pull in the thread that Senator Rosepep started.
Sure.
Based on your increased investigations, I was curious, have you seen an uptick in increased, I know prosecution isn't always your goal, as you mentioned, resolution is. Have you seen an increase in an outcome of an investigation?
Yes, I think in particular, just to use one example with election law complaints. So our election law complaints fall into 3 basic categories. One, and certainly a large number of them, are essentially failure to file required reports. That's not that doesn't really capture the imagination of the public, but it's a critical step to ensure the integrity and transparency of the electoral process, to ensure we get these campaign finance reports. And so a lot of times we work with the individual campaign to resolve this. And some of the committees who are failing to file the reports, some are large, sophisticated organizations, most often are not.
Mhm.
And the fines can be fairly rigorous. So we work with that, with those individual campaigns, those committees, to try to resolve the matter, to ensure that there's a sufficient impetus for deterrence, to ensure that people will continue to file the reports. But my interest is not to bankrupt a mom and pop campaign that took interest. The last thing I want to do is deter anyone from participating in our political process. So we want to ensure that their resolutions are just and compliant. And so the civil resolutions, we've seen an uptick in those, and we've improved our methodology for doing that, writing letters, calling the individual campaigns, working with them. We have a amended a form so people could ask for a waiver of fees or reduction in fees to try to bring them in compliance. Now, we don't take everybody's word for it. We do investigate, but to ensure that people can work through that. The other area is campaign in some of the campaign finance violations, some of which, when you start going through reports, you see more criminal activity. And that's unfortunately someone who's embezzling money from the account or spending it on improper matters. So those we move into the criminal arena,
Mhm.
and you hear more about them. But the others, I would say almost the vast majority, we're able to resolve, and we're able to resolve in a positive manner. And hopefully others would say, no one likes dealing with a law enforcement agency, but if we have to deal with one, the Office of State Prosecutor is a reasonable professional organization to deal with.
So I'm trying to tee you up because you mentioned that you are looking for perhaps more contractual positions that you can
Right.
then convert into state pins. What, if you had any amount of money in the world, what do you need to fulfill your agency's mission?
If I had any amount of money in the world, I would need at least 7 more bodies. And I think then we could cover the gamut. Because obviously with limited personnel, there are people there are probably some complaint that is slipping through the crack, that if we had could do a little bit more, we could work through. I'm pretty confident we're hitting the optimum solution with what we've got. But I'm also pretty confident after over 3 years in this job that I've exhausted just about every shred of my maybe limited management skill to ensure that as a good steward of the state's resources, we're expending them in the best possible manner to get to that location. And those 3 bodies would be 3 prosecutors. I would love to assign a full-time prosecutor to the election law arena. I really think
It's
that
important.
that is important, and it's an area that people don't come to our office with expertise in, as you can imagine. So they're knowing the vagaries of the election law, campaign finance laws, et cetera. We need a prosecutor, as I mentioned, for special victims. When I inherited this office, I always assumed that I'd be dealing much more with financial crimes and white collar crimes. And we do have a lot of those, and those are very, very important. But we also investigate official misconduct. And that official misconduct can manifest itself in different ways. Misconduct conducted under the color of an office. And it's troubling that a lot of that is sexual assault, sexual harassment, just physical assault, things that are very disturbing. And you need a little bit of specialized expertise to bring to that. Now, we're able to complement our efforts now because we have great relationships with our counterpart agencies. So if I need expertise in a certain area of prosecution, I can borrow that from a local state's attorney. But that's not optimum because they're very good at special victims, but they don't have any experience in doing actual misconduct cases, and those could be nuanced as well. So working in that, so 3 prosecutors in our regular political corruption cases. There's no such thing as an easy political corruption case. As my deputy, Ms. David, who's looking forward to spending most of the next couple months in trial, could tell you those are very difficult cases. Many of our targets are relatively affluent. They can afford the best possible legal representation. And I'm very proud of our team. I think we can go head to head with them, but that's not an easy task, and it takes a lot of resources. So I can't hire attorneys right out of law school. So hiring experienced prosecutors and paying them at the level that they need. You're never going to be able to match the private sector, but I think with the fascinating nature of our target set, what you do for the community, you can bring people in and to do that. And then on the investigative side, we need people with experience in financial crimes investigations. You can work 100 homicides and then you see one bank statement and it drives your brain crazy. It was some investigator. So bring that kind of expertise into the mix, helps us move forward with those cases. I'd like to have a forensic accountant as one of those investigators because that would really help out. And the last body would be a paralegal. There's a tremendous amount of administration support. We're edging our way to that with these contractual positions, but if I were head of the budget for a day and worried only about myself, that would be the investment.
Well, we just get to be head of 1/3 of the budget for a couple days, but can you draft that in writing for us, please, along with some estimates on the cost and get that to the subcommittee, please?
Certainly.
I'd appreciate that. I don't want to belabor the point of special victims, but it's just, to your point, it's not something that people would normally think about for your office. Without too much detail, could you give us an example of a case that you recently handled, or with? I'm just curious about misconduct in office that's not election related.
So that involves special victims, Senator?
Or whatever you're comfortable sharing. Again, this is a new kind of concept for.
Let me turn to Ms. David, who's unfortunately been handling a number of these cases, and we can perhaps provide some more information.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the question, Senator. And I'm going to be more vague, but we're dealing with a significant amount of, well, first of all, we have a prosecutor who was ultimately federally charged for using grand jury subpoenas to stalk women, getting their phone numbers,
I recall that
information about them. In other contexts, we deal with a lot of cases involving the use of images disproportionately of women for what we now have statutes for sextortion and other types of things, but used in a political context, or used in kind of police powers, allegations of people asking for certain favors or benefits as it relates to their ability to use their position. So it's going to be distinct from sort of a general harassment. It's going to be when the position itself is used in that type of exploitation.
Okay. I appreciate that nuance and look forward to working with your agency on getting you everything you need. Great.
If I just add one thing to that, Senator, people always jump to when you say official misconduct, they think police misconduct, I think naturally. And we certainly do a large number of those cases. I think our counterpart state's attorney agencies, particularly in the smaller counties where everybody knows everybody else, they recognize the perception of conflict of interest. They don't hesitate to bring us in to work on those cases. And also because we have an expertise in misconduct. But there are other officials who are not police officers who abuse their position of power to sexually exploit underlings or to engage in other reprehensible conduct. It's not necessarily financial, but it certainly is criminal and certainly something we can't tolerate.
Absolutely. Your agency is integral to public trust. And I think the subcommittee agrees that we want to get you everything you need to keep that up. Okay. Any other, Senator Respect?
I do have one other question. This is more back to not election law, more to certainly financial chicanery, but also to other kinds of misuse of office. Is there anything, do you get enough complaints and enough exposure to what may be going on out there that you can identify any fixes, policy fixes or administrative fixes to reduce the likelihood of abuse, as opposed to just catching guys and catching folks and then prosecuting them, but somehow fix the system to make it less likely to happen?
Yes, absolutely. Sarah, did you want to?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, so there's kind of, and again, in reflecting on, your earlier question, Senator, about these kind of resources component, financial crimes is an area that, does need more robust attention as its, local offices are more limited in that sense. But Senator Jackson has helped us significantly with legislation, regarding just increasing statute of limitations periods. We've put in legislation to talk about that because these financial crimes take a long time to unearth.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the issues that we're dealing with have to do with, okay, by the time we've discovered what the gravity of the offense is, the statute of limitations has passed because we don't have a vast array of auditors addressing these issues from the outset. We work very closely with our, counterparts in all of the agencies throughout the state to try to ensure that we are able to leverage all of the different resources. But we've been talking about legislative fixes as it relates to statute of limitations. Also, where we can kind of create more oversight that does create compliance, training, and other
That's
types
really
of
what
things.
that's really what I meant was trying to stop the stuff from happening as opposed to catching them after it happens.
Yeah, and I mean, we work with our counterparts on compliance, on training. We work as a lot of the unspoken work that's not in this is where we are working in an advisory role to help individuals understand or agencies understand
Gotcha.
how to do those things. We absolutely take that
Thank
seriously.
you.
Mhm.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. We look forward to working with you. Appreciate you
very
being
much.
here. Have a good weekend.
Same to you.
Okay, next we have MDOT, the Secretary's Office, and we have Steve McCulloch, who is here. Thank you, Steve. And colleagues, we passed out an additional piece of testimony that came to us late yesterday on this budget, just so you're aware. Ready when you are.
Okay. Madam Chair, members of the committee, here to present the Secretary's Office for the Department of Transportation. As you're all aware, the Secretary's Office provides overall policy direction to the Department of Transportation. Its budget also includes miscellaneous grants for various transportation projects or purposes to both local governments and private entities. Looking at the operating budget, the change in the allowance increased by $7.3 million or nearly 7% to $113 million. On the PAYGO side, the change is a decrease of $22.7 million to 53. We'll get into that a little bit. Turning now to the managing for results, the first measure on page 5, exhibit 1, shows the number of filled and vacant positions. There's been a lot of interest in vacancy rates. I've always shown this chart because vacancy rates can vary depending on positions being added or demolished, abolished, et cetera. So looking at the number of filled positions, is a good measure. And in terms of the most recent snapshot, which was January 1 of this year, the department had 42 fewer positions than it had a year prior. This is the third year in a row that filled position numbers have gone down for the department. Having said that, the second exhibit on page 6 shows vacancy rates for each of the TBUs over the last 12 months, and it shows the change. And every TBU except for state highways had higher vacancy rates at the end of the year than they had at the beginning. And this just reflects the issues that you've been dealing with all of your agencies. You can see from this exhibit that the Port Administration has the highest overall vacancy rate among the TBUs. There was a good discussion in this committee when they were before you as to their challenges. The third managing for results measure on page 7, exhibit 3, is system preservation funding. There has been a goal for many years for system preservation funding to be at least $850 million per year. You can see by this graph that they have met this goal and are projected to meet it for the next 2 years, going back to 2015. Given that they are meeting this, raises the question of whether they should maybe adopt a different measure to maybe give either a stretch goal or a better way of measuring progress. Something like dealing with state of good repair, maintaining that, and then picking a number of years to eliminate the backlog, something like that. So we've asked the agency to address that issue. Turning now to the 2024 budget, Exhibit 4 shows the overall spending for the agency, and I just like to point out for the Secretary's office that if you look at this pie chart, nearly half of its budget is IT services that support the entire department. So it is a big number for spending, but over half of that is just related to keeping their IT systems, in good working order and supporting the department. Personnel deal with another third, and then there are operating grants and aid that we'll see a chart in one moment looking at that spending. The proposed budget, as I indicated at the beginning, increases by $7.3 million. Of that, the personnel accounts for about 27% of the increase. Departmental administration leading, as you can see here, cybersecurity, a big jump in spending there to address that concern, accounts for 47% of the change, with operating grants and aid and cost allocations from other agencies accounting for 12% and 13% respectively. So the operating grants and aid, we show this chart every year, Exhibit 6 on page 11, lists the operating grants and aids, and you can see that to a large extent, this is funding for the metropolitan planning organizations required by federal funding or federal law. There's a large amount of federal funds that go into this and then are matched by the special funds. And there are some other miscellaneous grants that are in every year for the things you see at the bottom of that graph, including pilot payments in lieu of taxes for the port and Baltimore City Marine fire suppression services. Looking at personnel data on page 12, the unit Secretary's office did increase by 4 positions. We talked about this in the overview. 3 positions were transferred from interdepartmental from state highways to provide overall support for the department in a couple key areas of archaeological studies, cultural studies related to the capital program, and then some operating and finance oversight. Turning now to the capital program, as I mentioned, the capital program for Secretary's office includes these miscellaneous grants. They generally support air quality initiatives in the Baltimore, Washington region. And also their capital program does support that IT and other systems and the headquarters building itself. Exhibit 7 on page 13 shows the 6-year capital program for Secretary's office by category. You can see that currently some of their systems are in major projects. Systems are ongoing. Those are expected to dwindle by the end of the 6-year period. Exhibit 8 on page 14 shows the 2024 capital program by project and program. You can see that their main FMIS or Financial Management Information System project is as the one project. They also have a number of programs, including the Bikeways program and the emissions reduction program that are also budgeted in this office. Looking at the cash flow, we'll talk about these in the next few graphs. You see that the budget increased from the time it was introduced last year, and then decreases between the current year and the allowance. Exhibit 10 on page 16 shows the change in the 2023 from last year to this year, and the biggest increase there is the $10 million for the Baltimore City sidewalk ADA retrofit, which was actually a legislative request last year that was included in the budget, supplemental budget that was introduced for the 23 budget. In terms of 23 to 24, that drop then largely explained by the dropping out. That $10 million was a one-time grant, so it came in and then it goes back out. On page 16, the first year funding, we've had this discussion for each of the units. You can see exhibit 12 on page 18 that in the Secretary's office, 7% of the capital program is first year funding for design or construction, with the remaining 93 representing ongoing funding. Exhibit 13 shows the projects that are first year funding, and you can see that the network, the Bikeways network program, is one of those, and this is why they actually have a larger percentage of first year funding, because that's a program, and so there are lots of sub projects that come in there. Some of those are new and they trigger that first year funding. There are a lot of other programs or projects, sub projects in that program that are ongoing, and so, but it does get picked up for that purpose. The one issue begins on page 20, and it's a discussion of the Joint Chairman's response report, asking for an explanation of how federal funding is determined, or the decision to use federal funds for county priority letter projects. You all adopted narrative last year, or actually language restricting funding until the department submitted a report explaining this. And there are a couple key takeaways from their response on the question of whether funds to fund projects entirely from state funds or from a mix of state and federal funds. The department indicates that it always seeks to maximize the use of other funds over the transportation trust fund dollars, meaning they would push for federal funding where possible, in order to save the TTF funds for projects that are ineligible for federal funds, those things, and also to use this TTF funds as matching funds and for smaller fund projects where it's just not really manageable to be using federal funds with all the reporting requirements for small projects. With the language last also asked it for an explanation of when the decision or how the decision was made when using federal funds as to seek discretionary grant versus federal formula funding. And there, the department indicates that it will always try to seek discretionary funds if possible, because that grows the pot. If a project is funded from formula funding, that's just basically deciding amongst all of the projects which ones get that fund source. It's not doing. And then finally, the report, we've mentioned this a couple times in the overview as well, the fact that federal funding is very complex for the departments to apply for. In transportation, they note there are over 100 different federal programs for funding, all with their own requirements and eligibility for spending and types of spending. So we do that. And then I do note at the bottom that there is $500,000 that's still currently restricted. And unless the committees, have issues, which you should raise now, we'll consider at the end of the budget process that they have met the requirements. So that concludes with the recommended actions, which are to add the annual budget bill language. So the first one on the operating budget just restricts the operating grants and aids special funds, which are the state funds, to the uses enumerated unless they come forward with an explanation of what they want to change. And on the capital side, similar language that just says if they want to add or change a capital project, $500,000 or more, they need to report to you first. And that concludes my presentation, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. This is the first time we've had kind of a required trigger or action in the subcommittee. So I'd like to take that issue up first. Any questions for the analysts specific to that action? If we feel comfortable releasing the funds today or uncomfortable, speak now or forever. Hold $500,000. Okay, I feel like we're good. Okay, any other questions for Steve? Okay, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Paul Wiedefeld, Acting Secretary of Transportation. And I want to thank Steve again for the fantastic job that he does, both summarizing the budget and bringing up some key issues for further discussion. As you know, the Secretary's Office coordinates department-wide initiatives and supports important work that takes place with our transportation business units every day. As such, we're working on some important transportation initiatives, and I just wanted to highlight a few of them for you. Obviously, one of the first and foremost is delivering the projects that we say we're going to deliver on time and on budget. So that is very important to us and will continue to be. That requires both holding managers and our contractors basically to meet to be held accountable for what they've have agreed to do on a schedule, budget, and scope. It also means that having a greater focus on contractual commitments related to minority business participation, and that will be a major focus of mine going forward. A second area that we're focusing on is identifying federal grant opportunities, ensuring that we are continuously improving our competitiveness for these grants through strong partnerships and available matching funds. We also want to ensure that local jurisdictions have the resources they need to effectively compete for those grants as well. So we do work with them as well in this. A third one, which is probably a little bit new for this committee, but I think it's important that we have a shifting of the mindset about the WMATA system, to think about it as an integral part of the Maryland Transportation Network. Hundreds of thousands of Marylanders rely on that system every day to meet their needs. And historically, I think the department's viewed it more as a grant program versus part of our system. So we need to recognize that WMATA competes for limited available funds like all of the business units that Maryland has, and that Maryland has a critical role to play in shaping WMATA's system and its operations. And again, with my recent background, you will see more of that. On other areas of focus, we'll be on taking a fresh look at the CTP, the whole process for developing the capital program, and actually the operating budget as well, to ensure that it's been, a lot of that process, particularly the CTP development process, has been in place for decades. And the world has changed. So we need to ensure that all voices are being heard and that we're collaborating with our federal, state, local partners and other stakeholders in developing the program and how we deliver the program, and particularly in services to meet the social equity, environmental protection, and sustainability goals that we have and that the governor has. Two other areas that we are focusing on, obviously, are the ones that were raised by the analysts, and we provided a detailed written response, but let me just to give you some highlights on the response. The first item we were asked to address is the vacancy rates across the department. As the number of filled positions at NDOT has declined over the last several years, we were asking our employees to do more and more at a time when the state wages were stagnant and benefits were declining. Recent salary actions helped to bridge the salary gap, but challenges remain. The state faces strong competition from federal government, local governments, and private sector to recruit and retain employees. And in an environment where teleworking and flexible work environments are important to prospective employees, MDOT can be at a disadvantage given the large number of frontline employees that must be at work every day to serve the public. And as you know, 24/7. We rely on our customer service agents to greet you at the MVA branches, our emergency highway patrol technicians to assist you at the roadsides if your vehicle breaks down, and our law enforcement officers to keep you safe. Although teleworking and salaries are important, they are not the only ways to address the problem. In my first few weeks on the job, I've heard complaints about the recruitment process being too slow, but I need to dig into that further, see if there are internal process efficiencies that we can do to improve the recruitment time. Our HR offices are facing the same vacancy problems as our other offices. We need to prioritize filling the HR vacancies so that we have the tools in place to build out the rest of the team across the department. As we start filling out the vacant positions, we also need to think about additional positions. Over the last 10 years or so, the department has maintained about the same level of budgeted positions while it has taken on a number of new responsibilities and is undertaking several major projects. I talked about improving project management a minute ago, and part of that solution is making sure we have enough resources and the right people in the right jobs to move the department forward. We also need to think more about positions requirements, whether we have the right requirements for each position so that we're not necessarily creating barriers to employment. This means rethinking criminal background checks, for instance, reevaluating education, experience, and skill set requirements. As we embark on this initiative to build apprenticeship programs across the department, we need to rethink things like the CDL licensing and the opportunities to help individuals earn their CDL license while on the job. We need to ensure that we're providing opportunities for all Marylanders to build lifelong skills in good paying jobs. The second issue we were asked to respond to is another area of focus for mine in the Secretary's office is the goal for system preservation funding. As Steve noted, the $850 million goal was in place for nearly a decade, and we do not feel as though it accurately reflects, I do not feel it reflects the current focus of the system preservation. Over the last 5 years, MDOT has expanded and enhanced its asset management program. We have better information today than ever before about the assets that we own and the conditions of our assets and the work that we need to do to maintain our assets in good state of good repair. As an example of this is MTA's 10-year capital needs inventory, which was recently updated in accordance with Chapter 352 in 2018, the state chapter. Each year, we are conducting state of good repair analysis for all of our transportation modes to identify system preservation projects needed across the department. In the upcoming 10-year period, MDOT has identified over $22 billion in state of good repair needs for the most critical assets. But it's important to note that that number does not include the WMATA state of good repair needs, which again reflects the need to think of metro systems as an integral part of the Maryland transportation network. MDOT utilizes a risk-based approach to direct available system preservation funding to most critical needs. This allows for system preservation funding decisions that are data-driven, which provide a more robust metric for system preservation than a minimum dollar figure. In closing, the DLS has had two recommendations for legislative notification regarding the operating grants and capital projects, and we concur with both of those. That concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. And I think it's officially as of an hour ago, Mr. Secretary.
Oh, good. That's
Yes.
good to know.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you. Congratulations, Secretary.
Thank you.
Could you expound a little bit on your development and evaluation process with Maglev?
Yes,
And-
sure.
As we see, it's Steve went over the analysis and it's in two portions of the analysis. So if you would.
Yeah, I'm just getting up to speed where we are with Maglev. As you know, it has a long history. And basically a lot of the ability for them to pull down dollars has to go through a public agency, and that's been a lot of our involvement. Right now, I believe the Federal Rail Administration and the group that's managing that from the private sector is working through some of their final environmental documentation. I think there's some debate on the funding level they need to do that. So that is really their issue to work through with the Federal Rail Administration. And when that comes through, we'll have a better sense of where they land with that.
Okay, thank you. And, I think if I might follow up, I know your office, when you look at the staffing level in your office and you took a respite away from the agency for a bit, but you were a part of the agency in the past. If there's any ideas that you have that we can partner with you about to ensure that your office, accountability starts at the top, obviously, but to give you the resources that are necessary to make sure that we have a robust multimodal transportation system throughout our state is the key here. So looking forward to working with you.
Thank you, Senator.
See you a little bit later.
Yes, sir. Just to share with you a little bit of my philosophy, which will be to push down a lot of things that don't need to be at headquarters down to the modes and then hold them accountable. Because some of the issues I've heard is that, that some things at headquarters get in the way of what they need to do. But as I've spoken with all the modal administrators, that what comes with that is accountability. And that I think that's the best way to do it. There are a number of things that have to be at headquarters office to perform, IT being one of the big ones that was mentioned. But over time, that has swung back and forth is the history of the department. I'm more of the philosophy that the people that are out there doing the work every day need to have the resources to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Teed up my question, which is the same question I ask of everybody, as you are well aware. Can you speak to us about the vacancy challenges specific to your office that we see here, and where you envision us a year from now?
Yeah, so I think our challenge is probably a little different, again, because of the not as much the frontline part of it and some of the issues that you heard from the Port Administration, for instance. So some of our challenges are, we're competing at a different level for different types of jobs. So it might be in the engineering side and in the finance side. That's very difficult. And as I mentioned to you, just coming from the private sector, they're facing the same challenges, but they have a lot more tools to go after. I think one of the things that we can do, though, is public service. There are a number of people, particularly of those types of jobs, that value that, and see that as important, part of their, where they want to be, particularly a lot of younger people having 320-year-olds that are going through that same process. And when they look at a job, yes, they worry about money and time and all that, but they also, have some social conscience and they want to do things differently. So I think we have to play up to that. I think we're very fortunate in Governor Moore. I think he projects that, and I think hopefully we'll be able to attract more people. And I think we ought to brand ourselves a little bit more that way. So that is one of the things that we'll be doing in the Secretary's office, and then all the other issues that everyone has talked about. So the goal obviously is at a minimum to cut that in half, but there may be some shift of those to other modes, again, so that they can do that work more efficiently and more directly.
Appreciate that. A couple more, you touched on federal funding, and obviously we have an unprecedented opportunity here. So can you give us a little bit of a preview of your strategy in terms of the competitive grants, not the formula funding, but competitive, and how we can partner with you moving forward in identifying and then fulfilling those opportunities?
Sure. The big thing there is to make sure we understand the different ways they're going to look at the grant applications. And some of those will require certain skills. Some of them will require certain stakeholder support, for instance. Some of them require where you are in a project development. So all the above we'll have to look at very closely. But I think we have an excellent opportunity, again, with the current administration, both at the federal and the local level now. And I think we can take advantage of that. And our intention is to do that. I have reached out, obviously, to our federal delegation to start to do that as well. And I think there's quite a few opportunities there that maybe we haven't pursued as aggressively as we have in the past.
Wonderful. And I'm going to suggest particularly where transportation and infrastructure meets resiliency is particularly important in my district. I know Senator Jackson's district as well. So we'd love to partner with you. And that's kind of a nice nexus for that federal funding in particular. Right. Okay. We have we have one piece of testimony from bicycle advocates, and I wanted to speak, with you mentioned fresh look at CTP, new mission, not new mission, but new vision. Can you speak a little bit about complete streets, walkability, bikeability, and how that's going to play out, particularly as it comes to your budget? Sure.
I think, a vast majority of trips start by walking, whether it's to transit or and when we start to think about bicycle and pedestrian access, it's really about community. because that's really where you can use those modes of transportation. So I think we've got to be part of that at a community level. I think it also ties to land use, that you have that ability. Obviously, there's some physical constraints, particularly with bicycling, but then sometimes sidewalks. And we also have to always make sure that we're doing in concert with disability needs as well. So I think just thinking of projects that way starts to change how you start to design, how you plan is how you start to design, and how you construct, and how you maintain some of the facilities that we have. So that is sort of the larger context that we plan to move towards.
Okay. I don't want to speak for the advocates, but they are requesting that your office hire a trails and active transportation coordinator to kind of go throughout all of your units, just something to consider moving forward.
Will do.
Okay. And then my last question, we talked federal funding, bikeways. Oh, any update for us on that TBD $500 million the governor has put in the budget?
Still working through that.
Okay.
And yes, but working obviously with the governor's office, and have listened to quite a number of elected officials throughout the state with some of their ideas. But as you know, I think the governor's been very clear, the types of things he wants to do with that. So I'm certain he'll be coming up in the near future with those.
Okay. Thank you very much. Senator Jackson.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, as our conversation will lead to this further in the afternoon, the relationship between the locals and the state transportation. For those of us who represent our areas that lead into the rural tier and in those areas, those are numbered roads, right? And so there's a huge challenge on the upkeep of those roads. And local governments, and the challenge of keeping those roads, even though they're located in the county. And I know we have a vast amount of roadways. So that's part of, we'd like to see any update that you can keep, that you can give to the committee as you're working your way through that. Because I know probably every senator in the state is probably talking to you about that same matter. But we would certainly like to walk with you through that. Because it's a valuable piece, and the more we can understand your progress, the more we can convey that to our constituency. So
specifically to some of the litter and things of that sort is what you're referring to, sir?
Litter and the upkeeps of the other roadways
and the general maintenance.
Yeah. So
right.
when you look at some of the roadways, I mean, you don't have the shoulders, and you're talking when you're in the rural areas.
Sure.
I mean, you have different types of vehicles that are on those roads, not just cars and trucks. You're talking agricultural vehicles and others,
Mm-hmm.
and that causes damage to the roadways. And so the upkeeps of them, the cycle of restoration of those roadways, but yes.
Okay. Yes. I'm still getting my arms a little bit around that issue, which is, and one of the things I've asked State Highway to really start to think about is not a one size fits all. It's a very diverse state in terms of whether it's litter control or whether it's basic maintenance. So I do understand that. And I just want to make sure that that's the way we view it. And that we're monitoring those changes as well. And some of it's seasonal. As you referenced. So I think we need to come at it from that perspective. And I know our district engineers generally are very, very good and very responsive. But maybe maybe we need to step back just a bit and look at some of the things that we've done in the past in those areas that you're mentioning.
Absolutely. And lastly, I mean, you mentioned it in your statement again, and we want to be your partner, but things have changed. And so the way we've done business has changed, and growth or any other expansive projects, particularly with economic development, that's a selling point for us all. So thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm going to emphasize the responsiveness from district engineers, incredibly important to us, because if they're not responsive to us, we can't be responsive to our constituents. And that's very important. As you know, you will probably hear, because Senator Jackson and my districts come together, particularly in the rural part, you're going to hear from our offices about tree trimming for those farming and agricultural vehicles. And folks from ag in the back know very well what we're talking about, but it's something as the spring comes and we're going to see growth. It's important to our district. So I appreciate you keeping an open mind about, to your point, the state's going to be different across the board, and we need to approach different communities differently. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts for us, or?
No, just
Okay.
again, I think that you just hit it, that we need to work together on so many of these issues. This is not a top-down approach,
Appreciate that.
Mhm.
Okay, I think we see you at least once more.
at least.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a
Thank you.
lovely weekend.
You too.
All right, we have Department of Agriculture and our friend Andrew Gray. Andrew, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hopefully you're seeing the budget analysis now. Yes. So Maryland Department of Agriculture, MDA, fiscal 24 budget increases $12.1 million or 10.3%. In terms of the fiscal 23 actions, there was funding restricted in the rainy day fund, the revenue stabilization account, $375,000 from the Maryland Healthy Soils Program. Previous administration was not releasing that money. The money has now been released. So there's an artificial increase in the funding for the Maryland Healthy Soils Program in fiscal 24 because this money is not being reflected in 23. In terms of the overview of the agency's spending, the Office of Resource Conservation is around 44% of the funding for the agency. It's around $25.5 million for the cover crop program and $17.4 million for salaries. For the Office of Marketing, Animal Industries and Consumer Services, largely Maryland Agricultural and Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation, or MARBIDCO funding. $15.2 million or so there. Also a significant amount of money for the Rural Maryland Council as well, around $8 million and so in grant funding. In terms of the overview of the where it goes chart for the agency spending, certain amount of money, the personnel expenses around $751,000 for reclassifications, primarily in the Office of Resource Conservation. My understanding would be to improve our ability to hire and to retain field conservation personnel. Talk a little bit more about that in a second. Employee and retiree health insurance increases by around $588,000. There's the annualization of the November 2022 4.5% cost of living adjustment. In terms of the other changes reflected on this page here, one of the big components is that the $10 million for the Maryland Agricultural Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation. That's the forward funding of money that was going to go to the Next Generation Farmland Acquisition Program over a couple of years. Chapter 39 of 2022, the Great Maryland Outdoors Act forward funded that money. You're seeing a $7.5 million increase because there was already $2.5 million that was mandated for that purpose previously, or it's in fiscal 23. For MARBIDCO, you're also seeing a $1 million increase for a seafood processing project mandated by chapters 30 and 574 of 2022. And you see the Maryland Healthy Soils Program increase of $500,000, but really it's on $175,000 or so because of the funding in fiscal 23 is now coming to the budget. There's funding around $500,000 for the Urban Agricultural Water and Power Infrastructure Grant Program. So really trying to boost urban agriculture is a real big focus on understanding kind of all the different farming needs and interests in Maryland. Urban agriculture is definitely one of the rising stars in that area. This would kind of acknowledge that in terms of the funding that's mandated by legislation. The Maryland Farms and Families Fund, really trying to make sure that people with assistance, people on SNAP payments are able to kind of use our farmers markets. And there's the Maryland Food and Agricultural Resiliency Mechanism Grant Program, food security issues, trying to address that. And finally, you see a $200,000 decrease for the Wine and Grape Promotion Fund, which has been moved to the Department of Commerce by legislation. Now I will go on to just a brief note about the Soil Conservation District personnel. So there are 53 positions that were hired or that was authorized in MDA's budget a couple of years ago. And one of the challenges has been filling those positions and then retaining them. So one of the classics you hear from most agencies that people come in, they get trained and they go elsewhere. So kind of a story here as well for the Maryland Department of Agriculture. MDA was able to fill up to 47 positions, but now it's down to 44. So it's looking to kind of hire those remaining 9 vacant positions. DLS does recommend that agency comment on the difficulties it experienced in hiring and retaining those positions that are funded through the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund. In terms of the personnel data, there's no change in regular positions. There's a 3 contractual full-time equivalent increase. A certain number of vacancies, however, a certain number of the ones that have been longer than a year are reflected in the Office of Resource Conservation, potentially related to some of the Soil Conservation District field positions. Then in terms of the first issue, this is the Cover Crop Program Performance Review issue. So the Cover Crop Program is an absolute national model. You can't beat it. I mean, there's a USDA report, the data is reflected in Exhibit 3 here, reflecting the number of acres, the scope of the program. It's amazing how big a program we have, how much money we put into it, but then what we're getting from it too. And so the question is, how are we doing with this program? And the one possibility is to consider that we've sort of stagnated in terms of the number of fall certified acres. We had a high in fiscal 2017, but it's come down since then, and the program is getting more expensive. So the base payments that we're providing to farmers, which makes sense based on all the input costs, those are going up. So we're not necessarily seeing more acres with increasing payments. And that leads to the question, are there some changes that could occur to address the kind of needs of our program, kind of move it forward? So the administration has worked on the Cover Crop Plus pilot program, which is looking at that pay for success model, which we've talked a little bit about, this idea that you're not just paying for practices, you're paying for outcomes. The idea here is to actually have a 3-year contract. So farmers are then making sure they're planting cover crops every year. That also has all sorts of benefits in terms of soil health, in terms of climate change, kind of carbon kind of sequestration concerns, and also obviously the profitability of the Maryland's farms as well. So they have a kind of a separate program that they're funded with the regular cover crop program funding, and it seems to be going fairly well. It's a little bit small in terms of the originally initial enrolled acres, but that's definitely moving forward. Just like to highlight though some possibilities for consideration about the cover crop program. Talked a little bit about targeting yesterday with the Chesapeake Bay overview, the idea of trying to find out where is the most need in terms of the nutrient reductions, at least from the Chesapeake Bay restoration point of view. So possibility there to explore really looking at certain areas of the bay or the watershed where that could really have the biggest bang for the buck. And there's a Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool folks were able to provide some information on kind of where that targeting would be most appropriate. Seems to be around the kind of Frederick area, around kind of in the Carroll County, around Aberdeen, kind of Hartford County, and then sort of on the eastern shore around Caroline County and kind of environs. So definitely there's data out there about the potential for targeting the funding for various agricultural best management practices, perhaps cover crops being a primary one. There's also the potential for considering a time limitation. So the current program is annual. So you're getting a benefit for that year, but you have to obviously provide money every year going forward. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has a sort of maximum 5 years that they're willing to fund on any one field, for what I understand, for their federal funding. Maryland might want to be considering something like that, where you fund for a couple of years, say you do the 3-year contract, but then you really look for the farmers to kind of use their own resources, look for other resources so that we could try to get other practices in place with that money. There is the possibility, though, you could lose some farmers through this, that particular addition or change to the program. Another consideration would be requiring additional actions. This idea would be you're not just planting cover crops as the annual practice, but you're also doing those natural filters that have the kind of year in and year out benefit as well. So that could be an additional requirement. So if you're going to do the cover crop program, that's great, but we'd like to see some additional work kind of layered on top of that as well, so we can get further along in our goals. TLS recommends MDA comment on those various potential modifications for the program. Next issue concerns the highly pathogenic avian influenza event. Very serious issue for both the poultry layers and for broilers. So those are obviously the eggs. Egg prices have gone up. Some question about that recently, and some questions about whether there's some price gouging, but the basic idea being that the poultry industry has been hit by the highly pathogenic avian influenza. There was an event in the Maryland, in Delaware, Virginia area around February of 2022. Kind of the timeline is laid out on the bottom of this page here. One of the things to really think about here is that the highly pathogenic avian influenza is a follow-on from the lowly pathogenic strains of it. So what happens is that it's in the natural wild population of geese and ducks. They're migrating, and then they would excrete that would then potentially impact the poultry operation. But what happens is that because we have so many poultry concentrated in one area, then the virus really has an opportunity to mutate, to become that highly pathogenic version. So one question here is, does it make sense to have tremendous density of poultry if that's what helps to generate the highly pathogenic avian influenza viral strain? Obviously, that's a difficult question in terms of the poultry model. DLS recommends the MDA comment on the safety of high density of the poultry given the potential for the generation of HPAI, the likelihood of future highly pathogenic avian influenza events in Maryland, the steps MDA is currently taking to limit Maryland's exposure, the next steps needed at the state, regional, and national levels to forestall the next outbreak. Next issue concerns the Farm Bill. So this is usually around every 5 years, it's negotiated on the federal level, and it's a huge policy bill, the biggest agricultural policy bill out there. And oddly, it's sort of been hijacked by the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Payments component, which is now the majority of the funding. But there are a number of titles, around 12 titles, that address all different aspects of farming. And obviously, this is very important for Maryland in terms of the benefits to our farmers, in terms of profitability, in terms of kind of looking at kind of what does agriculture look like moving forward. The Environmental Working Group, nonprofit organization, has provided some information about what the benefits look like to Marylanders. And this Exhibit 6 reflects some of the information. This paragraph reflects kind of the overall amounts provided for, say, crop insurance subsidies around $400 million or so. The commodity programs around $900 million. So these are large numbers. This is obviously very important to Maryland farmers to be able to kind of take advantage of this program. However, it looks like, according to the Census of Agriculture, the 2017 Census of Agriculture, which will be updated, is currently they're in the process of doing the 22 one. There's only about 28% or 29% of Maryland's farms are actually benefiting from the funding from the Farm Bill. So DLS recommends that MDA comment on what changes it anticipates in the 2023 Farm Bill, what changes would be beneficial to Maryland farmers, and how more Maryland farms may take advantage of the potential funding from the Farm Bill. Issue 4 concerns annual budget bill language that's restricted funding for enforcement and inspection position strength assessment and vacant position report. So these are quarterly reports with funding released. Basically for that money then be used to fill vacant positions in the compliance and enforcement areas. So MDA has 2 components, the kind of nutrient management side and the turf grass nutrient management. And they've been doing inspections. Obviously there's some changes due to the COVID pandemic, but it looks like they're on track to kind of continue basically the progress they've been making. DLS recommends that the annual language be included as well in the fiscal 2024 budget. Then the 5th and final issue concerns Maryland agricultural profitability. So the Secretary has made very clear that this administration is focused on agricultural profitability, which is tremendous. This is actually one of the huge challenges in the agricultural field, as far as I know, is this idea that we want our food to be inexpensive, but we don't want to pay our farmers somehow to do that. There's sort of the disconnect there. How do you kind of make this work? Because obviously the farmers need to pay for all their capital costs, their land costs, the regulatory issues that come up as well. So obviously profitability is very concerning to everybody. The question is, how do you get there? So the Maryland Agricultural Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation certainly has a significant amount of increased funding for profitability concerns, kind of loans and grants to organizations. There's Maryland's Best program as well that kind of helps with marketing purposes too. Exhibit 7 reflects the kind of from what I can tell, the direct government payments, though, don't really matter all that much in terms of farm profitability. And this could be federal dollars only, but regardless, it reflects that, with net cash income being largely reliant on commodity markets is what it appears like. The direct government payments in this exhibit reflected only between 4% up to 38% in 2020. I think that was a kind of anomaly due to kind of COVID, and raises the question of, so how much can Maryland Department of Agriculture really move the needle? Therefore, the recommendation for this particular issue is for the agency to comment on how it plans on increasing farm profitability in terms of programs and funding levels, the magnitude of the impact it expects to achieve, and the economic and regulatory forces that affect farm profitability in Maryland. Finally, very long-winded way to say it, I concur with the governor's allowance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for that passionate budget analysis. Senator Jackson.
Thank you. Great job, Andrew. A couple of questions for you. Regarding the 2018 Farm Bill and the recommended, or it looks at it about, it runs about 5-year cycles. So we talked, you mentioned that the SNAP funding sort of hijacked the dispersion of the dollars Is there a,
It hijacks the policy, the politics of it.
Got you.
But it's, I'm sorry, SNAP payments are not taking away from agriculture.
no, I got you. I got you.
It's the politics issue.
I got you. So is there a preferred breakdown percentage wise that we would look at going forward with this?
For the Farm Bill funding coming to Maryland,
Yes.
I do not have one. That's an excellent question for the agency. I think that's a very important thing to ask.
Okay, thank you. And then secondly, as we move forward, so this every 5-year cycle that we're looking at, do you have a forecast, or is that for the agency as well, for the next round? So we're in 23 now, 2018 Farm Bill, 23, the next cycle.
So we do not actually do any kind of the forecasting. The Congressional Budget Office does have forecasts. And I did look at some of the information that indicated they were looking at a baseline. Maryland Department of Agriculture might have more information about that. But certainly they're in the negotiations now. And it'll be obviously kind of throughout the year. My understanding is a lot of the programs sunset this year. So that's why it's every 5 years. But there are obviously, there's so many different programs that are either authorized or, they're mandatory or they're discretionary. So it'd be difficult for me to say, and I think I would defer to the agency on that, but certainly an excellent point to make about what do we want to see from that Farm Bill.
Got you. Thank you.
Senator, you just sparked a great idea. I think we should have a bit of a special meeting, inviting Department of Ag back and inviting some of the partners to just drill down into the Farm Bill and kind of wish lists and how we can be helpful there. But Andrew's right, it's going to be more political than I think any previous Farm Bill in history. So we want to make sure that this subcommittee understands the funding opportunities, and also we work together on helping to actually get a bill, because that might be a bit of a challenge this year.
Certainly, there will be discussion on the PAYGO side of things about funding, the federal funding for the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation program. And I think perhaps the agency could either speak in that context or here as well about that.
All right, we have an excused absence from the new secretary for being under the weather, but we have Deputy Secretary Connolly with us. Please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Steve Conley, I'm the Deputy Secretary of Maryland Department of Ag. Secretary Addix does send his regrets for not being able to be here, but I think he did the responsible thing and not getting the rest of us ill by not being here.
He texted me regrets even this morning.
Yeah. I'm sure he's watching right now, so he'll be critiquing me, and I will, when I get back to the office, thanks. So want to thank Andrew for his thorough analysis. There's some issues in there that frankly, I'm not sure we have the answers for, especially when it comes to Farm Bill. But I'd like to go kind of walk through, the questions that Andrew has raised and at least give our perspective. And the first one has really to do, and I think from the hearing yesterday that I attended, one of your issues of concern is really vacancy rates. And I think that that's a major concern of Secretary Addix as well as Governor Moore. We checked today, our vacancy rate for MDA right now is 11.5%. We've had as high as a 23% vacancy rate. COVID really, we had people retire. We had people that decided not to come back to work. We had challenges hiring people during the pandemic. But we are doing some things to help to retain the great employees that we have at MDA. We've gone through an annual salary review process for our inspector series and our grading series to make sure that they were getting adequate compensation for the work that they do. And we were approved by DBM. So we've got some additional funds going to our workers that never missed a day during the pandemic. If they are greater, they were in the plants doing their jobs. We also have reclassed our senior program managers to help retain those. I think that our salaries historically have been a little bit lower than some of our competing our sister agencies. It's just in nature. Agriculture tends to be a little more conservative in its approach to salaries. We've also stepped up our recruitment efforts through a whole variety of different agricultural newspapers, participating with groups such as Manners, which is Minorities in Ag and Natural Resources. Our resource conservation folks are working closely with them. We're actually participating in jobs fairs. We had one yesterday at University of Maryland, one today at University of Maryland Eastern Shore. So we're really trying to decrease that vacancy rate, and we think that the recommendation of a 7% vacancy rate, we're going to strive to get there.
That's your goal. Okay.
So, and Hans, if you want to just briefly touch on the specific question about the resource conservation positions, the 53 that we got, we have 44 of those are filled right now.
Yeah, we filled 44. We've gone through numerous recruitments through that process. As Deputy Secretary said, we've gone through a number of different avenues to trying to fill those positions and to retain those positions. I will also just add to this, the process of trying to fill these positions is a bit cumbersome. Just as an example, we currently are the most recent recruitment we went through to fill 26 positions. We were able to recruit, I believe it was 17, 18 out of that 26. However, we had over 100 applicants for those positions. 41% of those applicants were actually recruitable. So that you have to go through all those applications. Then your HR department has to go through figuring out which ones are actually, you can actually, hire, or go through the recruitment, through the panel discussions and so forth. So it's 3-4 month process at least. So it is very long-winded. It's a bit cumbersome.
This is Hans Schmidt, our
Yes,
Assistant
I'm
Secretary
sorry.
for
No,
Resource Conservation.
thank you. If I could stop you right there, because I would love to go back and forth a little bit on this. I promise I'm not channeling Senator Rosapep, but I've done a lot of work on this through the Bay Commission and our partners in Pennsylvania, Senator Scott Martin, who is also thinking about workforce development. So let's start with the easy part, which is it sounds like we're hearing this across the departments, the 3 months to even not even on board, but really go through the process. If I'm putting my civilian hat on, I don't know if I'd want to go through a 3-month onboarding process. I mean, you're going to have other opportunities out there. So has the department considered really trying to speed that up, or is it you, is it DBM, is it kind of everybody together? How can we cut that time?
Well, I think it's the process that's out there that we need to go through. And Secretary Addix has, from day one, has stated we need to ramp this up. We need to find means, because you're absolutely right. In the private sector, or people who are looking for other jobs, they're not going to wait 3 or 4 or 5 months to find a job. They're going to go off and find another job. And then what do? We start all over again. Right. And so again, this is just part of the process that we've been going through.
But you're focused on it, which is what we would like to hear. Okay.
Yes.
Next question. I appreciate that these positions in particular, there's some federal guidelines around higher education levels. Is that so they have to have a 4-year degree?
For the most part, yes, depending upon those positions.
Right. And
yes.
again, not channeling Senator Roosevelt, but this part drives me crazy because from my understanding, they don't have to have a 4-year degree in, say, agricultural science. They just have to have a 4-year degree. And so it feels like we're very disconnected between how to actually build a pipeline here.
And actually, let me just back up here for a second, because in one of the last recruitments that we did downgrade some positions. Okay. So it didn't necessarily have to get to that 4-year degree. In fact, we've had some ongoing conversations with the University of Maryland to looking at even 2-year graduates, associate graduates who can, could be ready, that would be ready to, start in those positions. So, okay. And I would even say that even these downgraded positions that we've hired, we've actually, I think our retainment rate is higher. So they've been it's some of the best hires we've made. So
I would love to work with you on this, because on my wish list for the 2023 Farm Bill is building out our workforce pipeline specific to technical assistance here. So I'd love to work with you on
absolutely.
that. Okay. And then where are we losing these folks to? Where are they going after we've trained them up?
So some are going out into the private sector. When we were granted the 53 positions, what we didn't know, and it happened right after we got the positions, that on the federal side, they all of a sudden got vacancies and they were going after.
Okay.
So some of our own conservation partners, we were competing against. So the feds pay better than the states. And so some of those folks were moving over to the federal side.
Okay, that's helpful.
Mhm.
Senator Jackson.
Yes, and you're spot on, Madam Chair. Look, I think the state at one point had an incentive program that kind of bridged the gap. The state helped with education, undergraduate education, master's level education. And so as this committee and others in the General Assembly, as we're looking at the challenge of onboarding qualified folks, from the internship to, we have these FFA programs where these folks, the managed program you mentioned earlier, these are stars that we're losing to other places. They're going to the universities wherever they can get these scholarships or get into the schools. But if they're in schools here, they can work for you, or they can work for other agencies, and we can, the state can eventually find a way to get back to helping our young people be a part of it. When you talk about downgrading and those folks haven't been still an employer, those are the folks that feel as if you're meeting them where they are and that they're more appreciated. And so that's one of the reasons why they're staying with you. So, but yeah, we're your partners, man. So,
And I just like to say, we have some employees that a lot of them have just recently retired, but stayed with the agency for 25 to 30 years, just because they like the culture, they like the people they worked with, and they like the clientele they worked with.
Wonderful. Appreciate that. Can we move on to Marbidco? If we have anybody from Marbidco?
Yeah, Steve. I'm here. Steve McHenry's here.
Okay, do you want to keep going or go through your list? I have a whole list.
Well, we do concur with Andrew's recommendations, if that's where you'd like to stop.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Please keep going.
Okay. So I'll let Hans do the next one, and this one really has to do with the cover crop program and its effectiveness and what we're trying to do to make some improvements.
So I appreciate Andrew's analysis and so forth. And every year we're looking at the program and how we can tweak the program to meet the needs of the farmers, but also meet the objectives of what we're trying to do as far as meeting our WIP goals and so forth. Understand so that there's a cover crop expert panel within the Chesapeake Bay program. And through their review panel, there's over 104 different options out there of cover crops. So we need to simplify it so it's not so complex and so confusing to our farmers and even to our staff who are trying to administer this program. So we've narrowed those down to those species that are best suited to meeting our WIP goals, but then also taking on some of those other objectives to trying to meet our climate resiliency, healthy soils, and so forth. So that's when we introduced the Cover Crop Plus program. But when we're talking about targeting, we're not so much targeting, again, just specific areas of the state, as Andrew, I think, was mentioning, Calvert or Carroll County and Caroline County and so forth. But we want to make sure that the program is available to all our farmers, because conservation, healthy soils is important to all of us. So we want to make sure that the program is tailored to meet all those farmers. So, and again, the Cover Crop Plus program is taking their cover crop program to the next level. It's a 3-year program, or that where a farmer is committing just a single field or single field identified fields that he will have that he's maintaining and committing that he's going to put cover crops in there. He's going to plant them in early. He's going to keep them in there later. He's going to put a cash crop in there soon. So that field is covered almost 365 days a year. So we're going to look at that program. There's an advisory committee that we're working through to help give us better ideas how we can tweak that program. We're also working with some expert panel folks who actually sat on this Bay review committee to help give us some incentives give us some ideas again on how we can expand it. But as Andrew said, it's the gold standard for any cover crop program in the country. And we appreciate the funding that's used for that program.
I'm going to keep digging in on everything we're talking about here. Okay, so what is the demand versus your ability to get this program out? Or do we have more farmers who want to participate in the cover crop program than we have funding to provide?
We can provide, we have not denied any farmer funding because we didn't have it.
Okay,
Where we want to make sure that the farmers who are applying for the program are in nutrient management compliance, in compliance with all our state programs, I should say. But we have never denied any farmers because we didn't have the
okay,
funds.
that's helpful to know. I do feel strongly, and I can also speak for Senator Gazzoni here on targeting. If we can find a way that we can marry the ultimate goals, but really targeting on particularly most effective basins. I think that's something we would like to explore moving forward, and love to have a conversation with you offline
Sure.
about that. And then I do want to emphasize Andrew's point. He didn't phrase it this way, but we talked about it yesterday. I mean, the co-benefits when we're talking about not just cover crop, but also riparian buffers. There's a lot we can do here and get creative. So we look forward to working with you. On
Well,
that.
the Cover Crop Plus program actually looks at the whole program from a holistic standpoint, that it's not just putting those excuse me, those mixed species for the 365 days a year, but also additional practices that can be put on the ground that, riparian buffers or some of the other practices that we fund through the MAX program, or improving soil health or something. So we are definitely looking at those co-benefits.
Okay, appreciate that.
Yep.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, let's move on. Avian influenza. I think Andrew covered it pretty well. But he wanted us to comment on, I guess, the concentration of commercial poultry operations. The high-path avian influenza hit us hard beginning last February across the country. It's in all 4 flyways. We've had positive test results in 47 states. 763 flocks have been depopulated across the country. A little over 58 million poultry, and that includes layers, broilers, and turkeys, and some wild bird operations. 316 of those were commercial flocks. 442 of them were backyard flocks. So all poultry in the U.S. is at risk. Our greatest times of risk are when the migratory waterfowl are moving, which is right now, because the migratory waterfowl are moving from the south, going to the breeding grounds in the north, and also in the fall when they migrate south. So it's a severe threat. The question is not if, it's really kind of when and how bad it's going to be. We have a cooperative agreement with the state of Delaware, their Department of Agriculture, USDA, and our poultry industry to respond to positive incidents, especially in the broiler industry. I think the broiler industry is doing a really good job of encouraging their growers to use enhanced biosecurity to make sure that we have making our best efforts to not have the infection, but it doesn't take very much of the virus to spread. It's highly contagious, it's airborne, and it's has very high mortality. It's also in our other birds, such as black-faced vultures, and 700 or 800 of those died over the past year, as well as other raptors. And it's a real threat. We had on February 1st, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Wildlife Services does hunter surveys where they go out and take samples from hunter harvested ducks. And we had positives in Dorchester County on 4 mallards and 2 black ducks. So it's the threats out there when we're trying to make sure we're following all the best precautions. Our commercial poultry industry, before they send a flock to slaughter, we do pre-harvest testing of every flock. That is the industry standard to make sure that those birds are free of the disease before we move them to the harvest plants. I think this variant of high path is just a bigger risk for backyard flocks as it is for the commercial industry.
Thank you for that. Has the department, it's a bit of a thing that annoys me when we misconstrue the price of eggs with inflation when it has much more to do with avian flu.
Yeah, I think that if you really dig into the prices on eggs, it's really kind of three things that
Okay.
were happening. There was inflation increase prior to avian influenza. It raised prices about 60%.
Okay.
And then we had this past fall up through the holiday season, you had increased demand for eggs.
Okay.
And there were 7% less eggs produced in the country. So supply and demand played a part of that.
Okay.
So I think that's, there's a bunch of things happened and it really drove egg prices up. I think the egg prices, because demand is going down a little bit, are coming down, at
Okay.
least at the wholesale price. Hopefully
Okay.
we'll see that in the retail
Okay.
establishment soon.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And then, next one has to do with Farm Bill. And I like your idea about sitting down, talking Farm Bill. Farm Bill's a lot of moving parts, a lot of complexities. As Andrew said, there's 12 major titles. Our Maryland farmers, at least the commercial farmers that make their living from their farming operations, participate at a fairly high level in the commodity title programs.
Okay.
They also are dairy farmers, have participated in a dairy margin coverage program at a very high level. The state of Maryland provided support for our dairy farmers in 2019, 20, and 21 in helping to pay their premiums to participate in the program. And we have about an 80% participation rate still, because the farmers see the value in that program.
Okay.
There's and I think that Senator Jackson asked what's sort of the breakdown of how much money goes in the big pot. 76% of the money goes into nutritional programs such as SNAP, WIC, other programs that support the needies' nutrition needs. 9% went into crop insurance, which is very important to our producers to be able to have a risk management tools so they can mitigate the risk. They pay a premium, even though it's subsidized, but it helps them mitigate their risk for a variety of different perils. The commodity program receives about 7.3% of the pot of money, and the conservation receives about 7%.
Okay. Thank you.
And we just recently were at the National Association of States Department of Agriculture, or trade organization. The general consensus is they're not going to get a farm bill done in time for 2023. They're just not, Congress is not functioning under regular order, I think.
It's very diplomatic of you. Yes.
And it'll be a major challenge to rewrite a farm bill. I know that they're holding committee hearings and they're working on it, but I think that it's a heavy lift.
Okay.
It'd probably be extended, which
Okay.
means some programs will get extended, some programs will stop functioning.
Thank you. That was my next question. Okay.
I mean, that's how it's been done in the past.
So I think all of this, there's no one piece of farm bill that's more important than next. Could you work with us, this committee, on what happens if and what has happened in the past as it relates to budget funding that would be coming directly to the state in case they push it off a year?
Sure. But a lot of the funding, at least in the programs that go directly to farmers, is delivered either through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, through their grant programs and their technical assistance, or through the local farm service agency offices, which there are 20 in the state of Maryland. That's where farmers go and sign up for their programs. But there are other programs that we rely on, whether it's specialty crop block grants or the rural development programs that are important, and we want to take advantage of them.
I think this is even more reason we should have a mini farm bill briefing, because we do need to plan contingencies in case Congress can't behave like we do.
Yeah, and there's a lot of minor programs that are very important to different sectors of Maryland's agriculture that you wouldn't really be aware of.
Okay. Deneen, if we can work together on scheduling something like that, I would appreciate it. Perhaps even with the House if they'd be willing, but I think it's important to plan.
And we'll make sure that
Just in case.
Secretary Addix is there.
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, anything else?
just that the reporting through the MDE, MDA report that goes to you, we concur with that.
Okay, wonderful.
And the next is profitability. And since Kevin's not here, I think we're really kind of in a renaissance in agriculture right now, where there's a real opportunity to do a lot more on-farm value add, create job opportunities for family members or new entrants into agriculture to really be able to be viable, and we want to be part of that.
Wonderful. Well, he's texting me right now, the secretary, that he loves the mini farm bill briefing idea. So he is in fact watching live.
Good.
Okay.
I was hoping that was the right answer.
Senator Jackson.
I'll just say this, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just say this, and for the gentleman that's listening, look, there's a renaissance here too. So let's get the work done for our folks. And it means the world. And I can tell you again, in the areas that I represent, there's a dynamic program that I tell the whole world, Ms. Cadera over at Gwynn Park High School with that FFA program. They're dynamic, hard charging young folks who can't wait to get involved. And it's, we have to be better about not having that experience there be the climax of that experience for them. Because there's a resource there with a nuance of how to get things done that we should capture. So,
yeah, and we agree with you that hopefully that they'll either become our employees or have an opportunity to farm on their own.
Absolutely, thank you.
And make sure we don't lose them to other states.
Yes.
Yeah, and just one final thing
Please.
in Andrew's analysis, he did talk a little bit about IPM in schools. If you have questions about the IPM in schools, we do have Kevin Conroy, our Assistant Secretary for
Plant Industries Investment.
Yeah, that's it. I'm sorry, that's drawing a little blank there. And all 24 school districts are compliant, and but we, I know that is an issue that's come up before, and we want to be able to, express that if it's necessary.
Thank you. Andrew caught that as well. Thank you. I do have a question about next generation farming. Is that best for you or for?
That's best for
Okay.
Steve McHenry.
All right. Thank you very much. Steve, welcome. Good to see you.
Oh, it's good to see you as well, Madam Chair, and Senator Jackson as well. Always a pleasure to be in front of this committee. This committee has always treated Morbidco very well. I'll be very brief. You have a very lengthy statement. I know Andrew stayed up late last night reading, and I'm just going to very briefly talk about the Next Generation Program. Thank you for the $10 million in the Great Outdoors Act that you were the leader on last year. We appreciate the forward funding of 4 years into one next year. We do have an emerging issue, which is why I'm here today. I had planned to sign up, but because of what's going on in the economy right now, the demand for one of our core loan programs, our Mr. BIF program, which stands for Maryland Resource-Based Industry Financing Fund Program. It's a loan program that we offer in conjunction with commercial lenders and the farm credit associations in the state that really helps particularly young and beginning farmers buy their first farms because they don't have enough of a down payment. There's maybe some credit shakiness that they need a subordinate lien lender like Morbidco. And of course, Morbidco is the state's economic development finance agency for the farming, forestry, and seafood industries in Maryland. So the demand, because of what's going on in the economy right now with both commercial and consumer interest rates, has driven much more demand than we've been anticipating for that loan program. And in fact, the demand has doubled. We've been making twice as many loans in terms of volume in the last 12 months as previously. We've submitted a supplemental budget request to the governor for $6 million. We hope that happens. And if that happens, we hope you approve it. And then what I'm going to talk about next won't be needed. But because of the acceleration of the Next Generation Program funding, if we don't receive the $6 million, we are anticipating, because of actions of the Federal Reserve, we do expect interest rates to be very high. Commercial interest rates today are about 8.5%, and our rate is about 4%. So when you blend the two rates together in a project finance, you can see you're getting a blended market interest rate for the borrower of around 6 to 6.25%, which allows the project to move forward. we anticipate that we're going to be making a lot more loans going well into FY24. So we just wanted to bring that to your attention. You have the lengthy statement, which goes into great detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Steve, appreciate you identifying a problem and a solution for us. We appreciate that. Obviously, we're going to discuss this as a committee, look forward to the supplemental budget, but appreciate you presenting us some options here. Just because I'm new to this subcommittee, can you talk to us a little bit about, do you have any goals for the loans that you make in terms of ensuring that we have diversity in that next generation farm? So we have, African-American, we have Latino, we have women, we have veteran-owned. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. We're very much focused on that. We have 17 programs today, 2 more coming in the next fiscal year, and the Finance Committee is talking about a third.
Okay.
And so these programs target different needs. Many of them are targeted at particular agricultural producers, urban farmers. Our Mr. Biff program actually has a great utilization by minority farmers getting into the poultry business. So about half of the loans that we made in the last 3 years in the Mr. Biff loan program, for which we had the demographic information returned to us, were to minority farmers. So we're very focused on that. Again, the Finance Committee has got another program that's trying to target more directed support to women and minorities.
Okay.
So, and we have an interest rate reduction. So if you're a veteran, you automatically get a 25% basis point reduction in any of the core loan programs we make. So we're all about that. We're trying to help everybody. We're trying to help deliver all boats in agriculture, wherever we can.
We greatly appreciate that scope. Could you, while we're making these decisions about your request, could you possibly get us that data?
Sure.
And I think that will help us in the back room.
Sure. I'm pleased to tell you, in fact, the Joint Committee on the Management of Public Funds hears from me every other year. So I have a report from last
We
November.
appreciate that.
But the Census of Ag, the last one was done in 2017, they're doing it now. About 3.6% of Maryland's farmers are minorities.
3.6.
3.6, just 3.6.
Okay.
Marbitco's demographic response is around 13%. So more than 3 times what the Census of Agriculture showing.
Okay.
So, we're helping to move the ball. There's more to do.
Yeah.
And we're trying to do
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I'd be interested in the data on minority women and veteran owned in particular.
Sure.
Okay.
You have to provide it.
We appreciate that. And
Sure.
one more question for you
Sure.
before you get off the hot seat. I'm sorry that I also created a new program for you last year
Yep.
with the shellfish and,
Yep.
and shucking houses. Can you talk to us if there's been any progress made there?
Sure, yeah. There's $1 million in the FY24 budget for the new oyster shucking house loan program, which is designed to help keep oyster shells in the bay. We are going to launch that. We're going to announce it in the middle of May,
Okay.
and we'll have the money available, shortly after July 1st. So we hopefully we'll have applicants and we'll roll the money out as best we can.
Okay. Whatever launch you do, if I could ask a personal favor, to
Sure.
include former Senator Addie Eckert in that launch, I greatly
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other updates for us on Bridco?
That's it. I know it's late and I'm happy to
Okay.
take questions, but you have our annual report, which we handed out too. So
Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you. Okay, thank you both. We have one more person signed up, our good friend Charlotte Davis from the Rural Maryland Council. Charlotte.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and our Senator from Southern Maryland. I'm Charlotte Davis, the Executive Director of the Rural Maryland Council, and here in support of the Governor's appropriation. We thank him for his support, including the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund and the Maryland Agricultural Education and Rural Development Assistance Fund in the budget. Our program has been under high demand. So for fiscal year 23, we received 215 grant applications requesting over $19 million in support with the funds that we were appropriated last year. We were able to award 84 grants for a total of $8.3 million. So we believe that these funds are important investments in our rural communities, and definitely thank your past support. Mainly here to answer questions. I did want to put a plug in it that the Rural Maryland Council is recognized under the U.S. Farm Bill. We are technically a state rural development council. We're recognized under the National Rural Development Partnership. So we will be seeking reauthorization of that provision of the U.S. Farm Bill and asked to be included in that discussion. That's important for us to interact with our federal partners. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and thank you for your support.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, with that, we can have every witness. Okay, we are adjourned for today, but Senator Jackson, we are back in this room at 1 p.m. on Monday to hear Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, Workers' Compensation Commission, and the Comptroller of Maryland. We are adjourned.